Hello, guys. So, since it is going to be the 1 year anniversary of the beginning of the conflict of Ukraine, of course, I believe the conflict started back in 2014 with the American led coup in Ukraine, which put in radical fascists into power into Kiev, and everything they've done and said from then on justified Russia expanding the war to further areas of Ukraine and doing what they did 1 year ago, and if anything, justified them doing this way earlier before Ukraine could set themselves up, get better trained and more armed, and dig in to the areas that they had. It would have probably cost less Ukrainian lives, less Russian lives, and would have been much better for the world. But unfortunately, here we are, and we are in the middle of this conflict. And let's just look back and, I guess, look forward and look currently at what's happening and where things can go from here. Now, ultimately, like I've said in the comments, I still stick by my statement that Russia will inevitably win. There is just too much political sway as well as military sway. And I don't take this view that Russia is this infallible war machine. They have a lot of problems. They have a lot of problems internally and externally as well. But they are competent enough to achieve the goals that they set out for themselves sooner or later. And by later, meaning that this conflict could very well expand, 10 years plus. People don't want to think about that. They think that it's going to end quickly. And there is definitely this sentiment, this push for things to accelerate and have this conflict end sooner rather than later. And there are certain reasons for that. For example, a incoming conflict with America and China. So it's going to complicate things for them to have a war on two fronts, meaning America having a proxy war in Ukraine as well as in Taiwan. So they probably want this conflict resolved because Ukraine isn't that important to America ultimately as it is to Russia and Ukraine, and to a lesser extent Europe as well. So let's have a quick look back. So all these areas, one thing people don't really mention is, so I believe that this area that Russia took in the beginning, I don't think they were going to take Kiev ultimately, like a lot of people say. They say they wanted to overthrow the government and things. This is what I will say about this offensive. I think Russia really wanted to give Ukraine a political out. And if you see how they acted, how they withdrew, and people made fun of Russia, how Russia was saying, well, we withdrew this as a sign of goodwill for Ukraine, that really they were pushed back. I think what this was is they wanted to give Ukraine some face so that Ukraine could say, look, we did our best, we were surrounded, and we had to cut this deal for a recognized Crimea, an independent Donbass, and of course neutrality with NATO. So that was, I believe that was the original plan of Russia, is they wanted to give Ukraine this political out. They could say, look, yes, we made this deal in the Donbass, but we had to protect ourselves, in the immediate proximity. There was a threat to Kiev, and we had to cut this deal. So it could have been that kind of like play. It didn't work out, of course. The arrogance and the ignorance of Ukrainians, and with the help, of course, with America and the suggestion of the UK country and people like Boris Johnson, most likely, Ukraine decided that they could win this conflict. And ever since then, Ukraine has been trying to expand this conflict to NATO. They've wanted to have that no-fly zone and things like this. So even though they kind of thought they could win this conflict, I think Ukrainians do know that the only way they could actually quote-unquote win is if this conflict is expanded to NATO, if NATO gets directly involved. And I guess in that scenario, they think that they won't be nuked straight away by Russia, or that Russia will give up as well and not extend the conflict to NATO, probably using nuclear weapons or other weapons. they have this ignorance and this lack of care for the rest of the world. But I think the rest of the world is smart enough not to get involved, but we'll see. And the pressing matter currently is this area of Transnistria and Moldova. Now, the new president in Moldova has been very hard-lined when it comes to this area. He's been talking about how he wants this area to be neutralized from Russians. And Ukrainians have said from the beginning of this conflict that they would be happy to assist Moldova if they were given the go-ahead by the government there to go in, take out the Russian military here and oppress the citizens, of course, and neutralize Moldova. The weapon cache in Moldova, I think it's irrelevant because in the worst case scenario, if Ukraine does go in, that cache will be, I'm assuming, blown up either with a rocket or with the people, mining it or whatever here. So that's neither here or there. But what Ukraine purpose, of course, of taking this area would be to expand the war into Moldova, and then to expand the war into Romania, and then to expand the war ultimately into NATO, because that's what Ukraine wants to do. That's the way out for Ukraine. That's the way out Ukraine sees. Let's look at what America seems to see as the way out for Ukraine. And what America's plan is, it seems to me, is that they want Ukraine to make this big push and threaten Crimea. And they think that if Ukraine has a big successful push down here, puts pressure on Crimea, makes Russia see that Crimea could be taken by Ukraine, then they could cut a deal with Russia. And I'm guessing the only deal they could cut in that scenario is definitely a recognized Crimea, a Russian Crimea, because if you're going to threaten Crimea, well, if you're going to cut a deal, you're not going to give Crimea away. Like, if Ukrainians want Crimea, they'll have to actually physically take it. And I guess they would want a neutral Donbass, because I don't think Russia will take anything less than at least that. If they want to take all this other area back, Russia will demand at least a neutral Donbass, which is the deal that Ukraine could have done from the beginning of this conflict. So America's, I guess, idea is that if Ukraine has a successful offensive, it might bring Ukraine back to the table to make the initial deal that they could have had from the beginning. And that's kind of sad if that's what their goal is. One thing I will say is that the question of Ukraine could have already been worked out. Like, we don't know the back deals going on between, Russia and America, China and America, Europe and Russia, and all these other countries. For all we know, Ukraine could already be decided, and we're just going through the motions now. We just don't know. So, but definitely the sway is in Russia's side, politically as well. Russia isn't a superpower compared to, China and America, but it is a superpower. It's got quite enough political sway, quite enough economic sway to get what it wants at the end of the day. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, Bakhmut, which is where the intense fighting is. I guess I'm trying to say things that are original that haven't been said already. And the thing that's interesting about Bakhmut is this kind of infighting between Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner, and the general Russian army. Now, this could be two things. My initial thought was when he started talking about not getting the ammo he needs, is that it was just like a kind of like a ruse to seem weak when you're strong, so that Ukraine sends more troops in, and that can be ground down by the Wagner group and the army. So if they destroy Ukrainians in a controlled area, then they don't have to destroy them somewhere else. So I think maybe that was the plan, is to make them look weak. But it also could be that the Wagner group and Prigozhin wants to kind of prove himself and to show that the military group is more competent than the regular army, and he's might not be succeeding as well as he hoped. And in that case, I'm just trying to read into it, and because he's not succeeding, he's trying to use this excuse of not getting enough ammo as saying, well, if we got enough ammo, we could have been more successful. So maybe it has kind of stalled or something like this. Maybe, I don't know, or it's a ruse. I think it's one of the two. Or they could actually just not be getting enough ammo, and he's just complaining that we just need more ammo, and we're still doing well, but we just need more of it. I'm not going to analyze exactly all the little advances and things like this. There are plenty of channels that do that, but overall, in the big picture, again, I stick by my words that Russia will ultimately win. It's just, it has too many things going for it. People make fun of Russia, like their nuke failing recently and things like this, and I do believe, again, that some rockets, some nukes in Russia have been sold off probably for vodka, or replaced, had the fuel replaced for with vodka fuel. Basically, I think that's true, but Russia has enough. Russia does do rockets quite well, even if it doesn't do other things as well as other countries, but it does do rockets well, and it does produce them in large amounts. And I guess the biggest threat now is if Moldova does decide to take this path of neutralizing Transnistria, they will have a lot of rockets going their way, because it's way too far for Russia to actually send direct troops to. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping Ukraine doesn't get their way to expand this conflict. I'm still hoping for the off chance that this conflict can be resolved diplomatically, but it is really a case of arguing with a stone, because Ukraine is just dug into this idea that they're going to take everything back, including Crimea, and that isn't going to happen. Russia doesn't want to nuke Ukraine. Russia doesn't want to destroy, especially the ethnically Russian living cities. But ultimately, because they aren't capable to do it without destroying everything, they tried to pussyfoot around in the beginning, but they just can't do it, and they will level cities to the ground. Now, I think if I had to assume which way Russia will push, I think it might push up this river. I think that's the plan, is they want to push up this river, use the river as a defensive barrier, and make their way up to Kiev, and then once they get up to Kiev again, probably attack from Belarus also, link up here, and then level Kiev to the ground. Now, you're looking at this area and you're thinking, well, that's so far away. And that's why I think this conflict will drag out for years, unless there's some kind of event that happens. If Ukraine tries to push and fails miserably or something like that, maybe it will accelerate things, and maybe as Russia does start pushing forward, there'll be more inclination to make a deal, and they'll have more land to make a deal for with Ukraine, so they could probably keep the land bridge now and give up some of the other areas. Who knows? I don't really know. I don't know how capable Russia is to do this in the short term, but again, ultimately, yes, they will achieve whatever they need to achieve, even if it means taking all of Ukraine. They will continue doing it, and I think at best or at worst, depending on how you see it, this whole area will most likely just stall, and you'll have small conflicts here and there, and that's just how it's going to stay for a while. So that's what I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't usually do these kind of analysis, but I hope you heard something original from me, and I just think there are people who do these things way better, and I love listening to them. But I hope I said something original. I think this area, using this as a political ploy, and I think that gets talked about enough. People still assume that Russia went in here to actually take Kiev, and they just didn't have enough troops. I think it was a political game, a political out for Ukraine, which they didn't take. that's my kind of armchair analysis. And yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to talk about. Again, I'm hoping this conflict ends, but here we are 1 year on, and I don't see any kind of resolution in sight. But we gotta hope for the best. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and all the best.